Tensions in the West Philippine Sea have once again intensified after the Philippine Coast Guard confronted a Chinese Coast Guard vessel operating near the waters off Zambales. The latest maritime encounter happened at a time when the Philippines is increasing patrol operations, strengthening military readiness, and deepening defense cooperation with allied nations amid continuing disputes in the South China Sea. Philippine authorities confirmed that the Chinese vessel, identified as CCG 4305, was monitored around 48 nautical miles west of Pundaki, Zambales. The area falls well within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone under international law. After detecting the ship, the Philippine Coast Guard immediately launched aerial and maritime monitoring operations. A PCG Piper Navajo surveillance aircraft was deployed to the area and repeatedly issued radio challenges to the Chinese vessel. However, according to Philippine authorities, the Chinese ship refused to acknowledge repeated communications from Filipino forces. Rear Admiral J. Tariela, spokesperson for the Philippine Coast Guard on West Philippine Sea issues, confirmed that the vessel ignored the radio warnings while remaining inside the Philippine exclusive economic zone. The latest incident became another chapter in the continuing maritime standoff between Manila and Beijing, where tensions have steadily increased over the past several years. Chinese Coast Guard vessels, maritime militia ships, and research vessels have repeatedly been spotted near Philippine-controlled waters, increasing concerns among Philippine defense officials and coastal communities. The waters off Zambales have become one of the most sensitive maritime areas in the West Philippine Sea. Philippine authorities have frequently monitored Chinese ships operating close to the western coastline of Luzon. Filipino fishermen in the region have also repeatedly reported intimidation, dangerous maneuvers, and harassment from larger Chinese vessels patrolling nearby waters. According to Philippine authorities, the operation against CCG 4305 started after maritime surveillance systems detected unusual ship movements inside Philippine waters. Authorities reportedly used international maritime monitoring support to initially identify and track the vessel before dispatching air and sea assets to verify the situation. Once the Chinese vessel's location was confirmed, Philippine forces intensified surveillance operations in the area. Patrol vessels maintained close monitoring while aerial units documented the ship's activities from above. Philippine officials stressed that the Chinese vessel failed to provide any lawful explanation for operating inside the country's exclusive economic zone. Under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, coastal states possess sovereign rights over natural resources and economic activities within their EEZs extending out to 200 nautical miles from shore. The Philippines continues to insist that the waters west of Zambales clearly fall within those internationally recognized rights. The latest confrontation happened only days after another maritime incident involving a Chinese research vessel near Pag-asa Island in the Calayan Island group. Philippine authorities accused the Chinese vessel of conducting unauthorized research activities inside Philippine waters near Sandy Cay areas in the West Philippine Sea. Surveillance flights reportedly observed the Chinese research ship operating alongside Chinese Coast Guard escorts near disputed maritime zones. Philippine authorities also documented the presence of multiple Chinese maritime militia vessels around nearby reefs and shoals. These activities have increased concerns in Manila over what officials describe as China's continuing efforts to strengthen and normalize its presence inside Philippine maritime zones. The Department of National Defense once again reminded Beijing about the landmark 2016 arbitral award issued by the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. The ruling rejected China's sweeping claims over most of the South China Sea and declared that Beijing's so-called nine-dash line had no legal basis under international law. The decision also affirmed that several disputed maritime areas fall within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. China, however, continues to reject the ruling and insists on its historical claims across large portions of the South China Sea. The 2016 arbitral ruling remains one of the Philippines' biggest legal victories in modern history. Despite that ruling, confrontations between Philippine and Chinese vessels have continued almost regularly across disputed waters under President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. The Philippines has adopted a firmer and more transparent approach regarding West Philippine Sea issues. The administration has significantly expanded maritime patrols, strengthened military modernization efforts, and increased defense cooperation with allied countries, including the United States, Japan, and Australia. Philippine authorities have also intensified efforts to publicly expose incidents involving Chinese vessels operating near Philippine maritime zones. The Philippine Coast Guard now regularly releases aerial photographs, videos, radar tracking data, and radio communications to document maritime confrontations in disputed waters. Philippine officials say this strategy is intended to inform the international community about developments in the South China Sea and prevent the normalization of unauthorized Chinese patrols near Philippine coastlines. The Philippine Coast Guard has repeatedly emphasized that its operations are focused on defending the country's sovereign rights while avoiding direct military escalation. Even so, tensions across the region continue to rise. Security analysts believe China increasingly relies on what experts describe as gray zone tactics. These tactics involve the deployment of Coast Guard vessels, research ships, and maritime militia boats instead of direct naval warfare. Such operations allow Beijing to maintain continuous presence in disputed waters while avoiding open military conflict. For the Philippines, however, these repeated deployments create constant pressure on local fishermen, maritime patrol forces, and coastal communities. The waters west of Luzon are extremely important economically and strategically. Many Filipino fishermen depend on these fishing grounds for their livelihood. Philippine authorities argue that sustained Chinese presence threatens not only sovereignty, but also the safety and livelihood of Filipino citizens operating in the area. At the same time, Manila has accelerated efforts to modernize its armed forces. Amid the latest maritime incident, the Philippine Air Force officially accepted 2 new Bell 412 EPX utility helicopters into service during ceremonies held at Villamor Air Base in Pasay City. Defense officials described the helicopters as important additions to the country's operational readiness, particularly for maritime security, troop transport, disaster response, medical evacuation, and search and rescue missions. Military planners believe improving aerial mobility is critical as the Philippines faces increasing maritime security challenges across the West Philippine Sea. The helicopters are expected to support rapid deployment operations and improve the Air Force's ability to respond quickly to emergencies and territorial incidents. The modernization push extends beyond helicopters alone. The Philippines has continued expanding defense cooperation with allies including the United States, Japan, and Australia. Joint military exercises have increased significantly in recent years. New agreements have also allowed greater rotational access for allied forces to Philippine military facilities. China has strongly criticized these developments, accusing Manila of contributing to rising tensions in the region. The United States has repeatedly reaffirmed its defense commitments to the Philippines under the Mutual Defense Treaty. Washington has warned that attacks on Philippine armed forces, Coast Guard vessels, or aircraft in the Pacific region could trigger treaty obligations. Japan and Australia have also strengthened maritime and defense cooperation with Manila, particularly in Coast Guard training, maritime surveillance, and military modernization. These growing partnerships reflect wider international concern over the security situation in the South China Sea. The South China Sea remains one of the world's most important maritime routes. Trillions of dollars worth of global trade pass through the region every year. The area is also believed to contain valuable fishing resources and major energy reserves beneath the seabed. Because of this, competing territorial claims have turned the region into one of the world's most dangerous geopolitical flashpoints. For ordinary Filipinos living along the country's western coastline, these confrontations are no longer distant international disputes. Coastal communities directly feel the impact of growing tensions in nearby waters. Filipino fishermen have repeatedly complained about harassment, water cannon incidents, dangerous maneuvers, and intimidation from larger Chinese vessels. Philippine authorities say maintaining regular patrols is necessary to protect these communities and uphold the country's sovereign rights. Meanwhile, China continues to maintain a strong presence across disputed maritime areas using Coast Guard ships, maritime militia vessels, and research ships. Analysts believe these operations are part of a long-term strategy to gradually strengthen operational control over contested waters. Despite rising tensions, Philippine officials continue to insist that Manila seeks peaceful and rules-based solutions to maritime disputes. The government says diplomacy remains important, but officials also stress that Philippines solve Sovereignty and sovereign rights cannot be compromised. The latest encounter near Zambales ended without physical confrontation, but it once again highlighted the fragile and increasingly tense situation in the South China Sea. Each new maritime incident increases pressure across the region and raises concerns about the possibility of future escalation. The deployment of additional Coast Guard assets, modernization of military equipment, expansion of allied partnerships, and increased maritime patrols all signal Manila's growing focus on national defense and maritime security. At the same time, Chinese activities inside disputed waters continue to intensify as both sides maintain regular patrols and surveillance operations across contested maritime zones. Further confrontations are expected in the months ahead. For now, the South China Sea remains a region where even routine patrol operations can quickly become major international incidents. The latest confrontation off Zambales once again and demonstrated how sensitive and unpredictable the situation has become. With competing territorial claims, increasing military deployments, and constant maritime encounters, every new incident now carries wider implications, not only for the Philippines and China, but for the entire Indo-Pacific region. And as tensions continue rising across the West Philippine Sea, the Philippines appears determined to strengthen both its diplomatic position and operational readiness in defense of its maritime territory.